This semester, the genetic disorder I was assigned is hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasis. Hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasis is also known as Rendu-Osler-Weber syndrome, or HHT, which is what I will refer to it as in this presentation. So HHT is a vascular dysplasia characterized by telangiectasies and AVMs, which are arteriovenous malformations. HHT occurs in 1 in 10,000 individuals, and then the onset varies by age based on manifestations, which I will touch on in the next slide. With HHT, affected individuals will either have abnormal capillaries or the connections between these capillaries will be abnormal between the veins and arteries. The capillary abnormalities cause the AVMs, and then the connections between the veins and arteries will cause telangiectasis. So our top 3 manifestations are going to be nosebleeds, which affect 50% of individuals. These individuals will experience 3 to 6 nosebleeds per day, and then they will vary on time and volume of blood, but mostly for a minute or less in time. And then blood, it will either be like a slow drip or gushing. The next manifestation is the telangiectasis, which mostly appear on the hands, lips, face, and oral cavity. And then those are just red spots. They can also be seen in some babies that aren't affected by HHT, and then those will go away with time. So should be known what the difference is. And then these are present in infected individuals in their 20s and 30s. Now, AVMs will appear if neither nosebleeds or telangiectasies are present, and then this will affect both the cerebral and pulmonary circuits. And then there's not a specific onset of age, but this is a pretty telltale sign of HHT. Some additional symptoms and complications are going to be anemia due to that blood loss, GI bleeds due to those abnormal connections, the blue coloration of the skin, which is related to anemia and loss of oxygen or inadequate oxygen. Hemoptysis is coughing up blood, and then dyspnea, which is just trouble breathing. Some complications, some of the less severe include dizziness and double vision, which untreated or unnoted to the doctor could become more complications like seizures, strokes, and heart failure. And then the back pain, numbness in the arms really only affects people who have those telangiectasies in their back. But, numbness could lead to other issues, not realizing that you're bleeding or, cut or whatever. So some treatment that there's ablation, which is basically zapping, where the bleeding's at, which will stop the bleeding. The goal is to stop the bleeding forever, but that's not always possible. Embolization is similar to ablation in the fact that they stop the bleeding, and that seems to be a more permanent option. Those are both small surgeries. The third is iron replacement or blood transfusion for the anemia, and then radiation as well. So some treatment suggestions is for affected persons to avoid aspirin and other NSAIDs because they increase bleeding. They're kind of like an anticoagulant. Affected persons should also track the food and activities that are going to trigger their nosebleeds. So in this way, their doctor can treat and make a care plan for them. And the last thing is to monitor AVM locations, just because that's where your doctor will focus on. Like if you have an AVM in your brain, then they're going to want to focus on that. Okay. So what causes HHT? HHT is a rare autosomal dominant condition that is caused by mutations on the transforming growth factor. There are 3 genes responsible for HHT, so the endoglin gene, or ENG, the A receptor type 1, or the ACVRL1 gene, and the SMAD4 gene. So the 3 above will correlate to HHT type 1, HHT type 2, and then juvenile HHT. So the inheritance will be through a heterozygous mutation of the ENG or ACVRL1 genes. We're going to focus primarily on those and not the juvenile till a little bit later. Depending on which gene is mutated, it will determine HHT1 or HHT2. So HHT1 is caused by the endoglin gene, and HH2 is formed by that activin A receptor like type 1 gene. For juvenile HHT, it's a mutation of the SMAD4 gene, which obviously caught at an earlier state will help the kid in getting treatment earlier. So that can be done through prenatal testing, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then if one parent has HHT, there's a possibility, 50% chance of the offspring being affected. So just one gene needs to be passed down in order for the kid to have a chance of being affected. So here is the pedigree. So up at the top here, Rick and Mary. So Rick was a carrier, Mary was affected. So then in turn, one of their kids was affected and one of their kids wasn't, showing that 50% chance, which obviously each of their kids could have been affected, but for this purpose, 50-50. And then farther down, Emerson and James, they have 4 kids, and each of their kids was affected. Then further down, on that 3rd generation, you see down here only 2 of Anna and Theo's kids, or one of the 2 was affected. Andrew and Teresa have one of their 2 kids affected, and then Cassie and Jared have 2 of their 3 kids affected. So there's a 50% chance. Yes. Okay. So for genetic testing, there are 4 options. So there's congruent or single gene testing. This is a sequence analysis of the endoglin and ACVRL1 genes. And then if no pathogenic variant is found, then a deletion or duplication analysis will be done on those genes as well. The second form of testing is multi-gene panels. In this test, the clinician decides which multi-gene panel is the best for identifying the cause of the HHT. Similar to the congruent single gene, they can choose from sequence, deletion, or other non-sequencing analysis. So this just gives an option. But obviously, if results weren't found, they would have to do a second gene panel. For the third type of testing is comprehensive genomic testing. So this is very similar to that multi-gene panel, except the doctor doesn't have to choose which type of testing they pick. So comprehensive genomic testing covers 95% of the exome. So majority of genetic diseases can be determined through this. And then just like majority of genomic testing, there's prenatal testing, and this will show that juvenile HHT. And yeah.